Okay, so we've paid homage to the Triple Gem, and we've gone through our tips and reminders for this session on deepening our practice of the Vatthupama Sutta. So the last part to these tips and reminders is really good wishes to everyone. So everyone who has helped us, teachers, friends, parents, all the different beings that help us to come to this path. And then those that continue to help us, even by encouraging us to come, or even by cooking a meal in order for us to get onto a Zoom session or go to a session. All of these people help us. And so it's good to have good wishes for all of them, as well as whoever's on this Zoom meeting today. So what might be really good is just to do a quick overview or recap of the Vatthupama Sutta, just in case there's anyone new. So the Buddha was talking about this simile of a cloth, and he was using this simile of the cloth to say, if you had a dirty cloth and you dyed it, then the result would not be good. And he likened that to having a mind that is polluted, defiled, or stained. And what happens is when we come to the end of our life, then what we can expect as the fruit of a dirty mind, a stained mind, is an unfortunate destination, a bad destination. So when we think about that, even in daily life, even if we don't think about the bigger picture of at the end of our life, but even during this life, if our mind is polluted, then the fruit of that is never a really good result. And so it's very important to see that connection. The opposite of that the Buddha was talking about was if we have a clean mind. And the bigger picture is that if we pass away at the point of death, then a good destination is more likely. So we go to a better destination, a better rebirth. But again, if we in this lifetime clean up the mind and we cultivate these wholesome states, so we remove all these imperfections, greed, envy, all these things, then what happens is the mind is actually has more clarity, it can concentrate more easily, and people are more attracted to a wholesome mind. We get a better result from people. And so that's the very clear thing that the Buddha shows with the simile of the cloth, that it's not good to tolerate imperfections that defile the mind. It's not good to say, hey, it's okay, we just observe that and everything will be fine. If we're really honest with ourselves and we look at the outcome, even in daily life, when we have these kinds of defilements that's on this particular slide, we find that our relationships get difficult, that life gets more difficult, that we can't sleep, we have, issues. And so it's really good to use this particular sutta to keep cleansing the mind. What this is really saying is that if we entertain any of these imperfections, then we're entertaining the greed, hatred, and delusion path. Have we not been traveling on this path for a long time? And so, what can we expect at the end of that? More of the same. But if we train our mind to say, no, that's not good for me, I disapprove of that, that can only lead to more greed and more hatred, more delusion. And I want to be on the Noble Eightfold Path, which is the non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion path, then actually you start to see the difference. So for those of you who have been practicing Vatthupama for a while, you already know that. You already know that through the wisdom of the practice, actually, when I do clean the mind, things actually lift. And over time, you see that relationships start to change. Internally, the way we think about things also gets transformed. And so the mind, what the Buddha would say, is it abides in more sukha viharana, like a pleasant abiding in and out of the meditation. So what are these imperfections that defile the mind? So we have 16 of them. So we went through this before, and we were saying there's covetousness and unequal greed. So in Pali, abhija visamaloba. So we know this to be the wanting mind, the longing. And basically, we've misapprehended the things that we long for. In terms of ill will, this is like the mental hate or aversion that arises. And Buddha uses actually quite strong words in the sutta that most people kind of don't see. But Buddha would say this is where we feel like with this mental hate, we want to annihilate people. So it's like when we're really having this ill will, we might be very rude in our minds to people. And essentially, it has this kind of get out of here type of perspective. But Buddha uses very strong words to say, I want this person destroyed, I want this person annihilated. And most of us, when we read that, we think, oh, but that's really, really bad. And of course it's bad. And it escalates when it gets to anger, so krodha. And when we have anger, it's like this has become more permanent. Like our views and opinions about people and situations become more permanent. We assign permanency to the situation. He or she has harmed me in the past. They'll do it in the future. They're doing it now. Same towards our loved ones. Same to helping the people I don't like. And so anger has that quality. And when we investigate it, what we said before in our previous session was that it's full of lies. People are not always a particular way. And then hostility is where we're now holding grudges. So that permanent thing that we've assigned to people has become really embedded, and we start name calling and all kinds of things like that. And derogation is where we remove people's good qualities. So there are certain things where we belittle people. And it's really quite a bad thing because we include a sense of me and mine in it. And we also have this permanent thing that we're saying about people that they don't deserve, they shouldn't have. And it's not true again. And then when we come to the disparaging is also something that is quite bad. This is where in our mind we want to split people. We have differences in the way we think about things. We're measuring, and so we'll come into that when we look at some of these links today about disparaging, how bad it is, because it leads to pisunavacha, which is this speech which is slanderous or divisive. And then when we come to envy, most people think, oh, I don't have envy. But in actual fact, when we really investigate, we do find envy. And I think today's meditations will be quite interesting because it includes envy in the links. And some of the examples I want to go through highlight where it's hidden for us. We don't think it's there, but it's really there. And envy usually says, he or she has, I don't. He or she can, I can't. And when we say these things, we often think, oh, that person is experiencing pleasure, and sometimes permanent pleasure, because that's the perspective we have when we have envy. And then we have the stinginess. And we were saying before in our previous sessions that stinginess, there are 5 kinds of stinginess. So we were saying there's labhamacharya, so stinginess regarding gain. So we don't want to share, we don't want to give, particularly associated with things that we have gained, so monetarily, so financially, or even the things that we have, or even our time, or things like that. And then there's also avasamacharya, so this is to do with stinginess regarding dwelling. We don't want to share our home, invite people, share the things that are in our home. Even our space, even within a family, we may not want to share the space that we have, and don't come into my room and things like that. And of course, our greatest abode is this body. So we can be very stingy regarding this body. And then the third one is kulamacharya, so stinginess regarding families or groups or clans. So we have very strong disparaging or divisiveness when it comes to me and my family, me and my sports teams, me and the schools that I went to, me and my college that I attended, me and my political association. And then it comes down to things like even gender, sexual orientation, race, religion, and so on. There's so many things that we can be stingy about or selfish about regarding where we stand with these things, heavily due to what we take as me and mine. And then the fourth one would be vannamacharya, so stinginess regarding reputation. So we're often very protective of how people view us, and we don't wish for people to see our misdoings. And so the stinginess comes in by how we think and plan around how to protect that. Stinginess has a protectiveness when we don't give, when we don't share. It's also around protectiveness of what is me and mine. And then the last one would be Dhammamacharya, which is stinginess due to any kind of Dhamma. So it can be Buddha Dhamma. And so we see this in in discussions, in Dhamma groups where, no, this is the way that Buddha intended this, and no, your practice is wrong. And then it comes down to other things like sciences around what we eat, which is the right diet, which is the right exercise regime, what is the right thing about climate change, what is the right thing about gender equality, all kinds of different things come into stinginess regarding Dhamma to the extent that we would exclude, not listen, try and defeat, and it escalates to other kinds of defilements. And so when we come to number 9, hypocrisy, I mean, the condition here is really envy. And so when we envy, we're willing to pretend, because we think another person is having permanent happiness over something, whether it's a handbag or whether it's a lifestyle or some view, then sometimes what happens is we pretend and we have this hypocrisy about what we believe in or what we buy. We pretend a lot. And then when it comes to the number 10, fraud, the sateya, we're often talking about deception here. So this is very much plotting and scheming to gain something. And these are the nefarious things that we're willing to break sila over these things. And so in our mind, it's a corrupted mind. And then when we come to obstinacy, this is the root of many, many arguments where we are very stubborn about what we think. So when you think about family arguments or even arguments at work or arguments with our neighbors, obstinacy is the one where we're very very much hold to our position on things. So there's a difference in volitional formations, the difference in how someone else has measured something versus how we measure something and what we value. And the obstinacy or the stubbornness means that nobody wants to budge. And so you see family members over sometimes very petty things. Due to obstinacy, they never forgive, they never heal, they're just always with this mental stain. And so whenever sometimes that name is brought up, like a family member, then the person, no, 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 I'm not going to entertain that. And so one would stubbornly hold on to that view. So imagine if you come to the end of your life and you have this mental rigidity, this obstinacy, stubbornness that says, I'm not going to give it up. What does the Buddha say? The Buddha says, bad destination can be expected, or a bad outcome if one is reborn into the human realm. And even in this lifetime, we know people, or we ourselves have these kinds of things, and we know the mind is shackled, it's heavy, it's unhappy, and also it can be quite paranoid. Now, number 12 is competition. So this is the dysfunctional competition of one-upmanship, where we would defeat at any cost. We don't understand or even we're not able to hold the suffering of another party. When you think about the extremes of court cases to even the small things in our mind where we unknowingly compete, even in doing good things, there's competition, and we don't understand that maybe we should be working together. Maybe we should understand that this competition is unnecessary. And then we come to conceit and arrogance. So conceit says, I'm the same as somebody else, and arrogance says, I'm better. So some of the time, we think we're the same as, the person that is above us at work. Or we feel like when we deal with our parents or someone who is maybe has a more seniority in the family, sometimes we have conceit that I can do a better job than what my parents do or my grandparents, or I can make better decisions than what they're making. And sometimes it's not true, but it's a case of this conceit can come in all sorts of different guises, and it's there right until the very end. Conceit is one of those things that is the higher theta. So often we can't see conceit, arrogance. We're normally conceited and arrogant about our position in life, the families we are born to, the wealth we have, the abilities we've been able to demonstrate at work or in the community. Even in a Dhamma sense, we might think we're the same as somebody who's a very good teacher, or we might be thinking in an arrogant sense, I'm better, or my meditation is better, and all those sorts of things. And what happens is that if you really look at it, if we have that kind of defilement, whether it's conceit or arrogance, is it not a block? because we will not be open-minded. We would not be open to feedback. We would not entertain differing views that may help us. So being able to be open-minded doesn't mean we blindly believe. So at the start, when we're talking about tips and reminders, it's not saying believe everything, from this session. It's saying have an open mind to entertain it so that when you contemplate this Dhamma, you would say, oh, let me just check. Let me try this and let me check. And if it doesn't work, then I don't need to believe it. But if it does work, then, oh, I haven't missed out. So arrogance and conceit is a block to those sorts of things because you think, I know better, I've done more, my experience is so extensive, and it's a block. And really, at the end of the day, when you think about most of these things, particularly the mundane things, the conventional things, what is there really to be conceited or arrogant about? When we're born, we're subject to aging, sickness, and death. So the predicament is already set. These things that we enjoy, and it's great if we have the punya, where we're enjoying the fruits of those good deeds, but it's still fleeting. For most people, if you come to the end of your life and all you've done is enjoy the punya, well, the danger is still there. And so I think that's very important to remember that we practice not um, because of something that is we're supposed to. We practice because we know that we've been treading the same path over and over, lifetime and life over lifetime. And maybe we don't always see that, but even in this lifetime, if we keep treading the same path, entertaining defilements, unfortunately, we're going to expect the same thing over and over again. And we see that even in daily life. And so what we say when we come together is actually, I want to stop that. And I want to see whether there's some way out. And so being able to look at defilements is a way out. And so when we come to vanity, this is also like intoxication. So we talk about this in terms of three things. So intoxication or vanity regarding our youth. So Yobana, or it's intoxication or vanity regarding our good health. So this is Arogyamada. And then when it comes to the last one is Jivitamada, which is vanity or intoxication regarding our life. And so usually we get swept away with, I'm still young, I've still got it, or I'm someone because of this diet, this exercise, I have really good health and I'm going to hold on to that. And, all the different things that we do in our life. I've been to this university or I've studied this trade and I've got my own business and all the different things that we associate with life, that we can afford this, we can afford that, we can go here, we can go there. We know this person, we know that person. But the Buddha would say what it blocks is the truth about aging, sickness, and death. So Yobana, this intoxication regarding youth, is blocking the fact that the minute we're born, we're all subject to aging. And when it comes to this good health, well, the minute we're born, we have four kinds of illnesses: hunger, thirst, urination, defecation, and then more on top of that comes. All of us are never free of sickness. And then the last one, of course, is around death, that ultimately, no matter what we do in our life, unless we walk this kind of path, take on the Buddha's instructions and try and practice and develop the mind, then we're all death bound. That's a given. The minute we're born, we're bound to death. And so even in life, we don't see the death bound nature. Like losing a job is a kind of death. Uh, the breaking up of a relationship is a kind of death. Losing on the stock exchange is a kind of death. The start of this session means there's going to be the death of this session. We don't think about it that way, but there is always death. And so that's something that we don't really focus on. And so it becomes a defilement when we just focus on the doing and the going and the external things. And so when we're here today, we know collectively we're not doing that. We're actually trying to get out of the sewer, get out of this endless process of getting things wrong. And so the negligence comes because of all the other things. In fact, negligence is in each and every one of it when we don't understand and we keep running amok with our senses, thinking there's no danger in these things. There's no danger in terms of getting caught, or there's no danger in the sense of if I go and spend time on these things, there won't be any craving or attachment. But what happens is when we run amok with our senses, with that contact, it gives that opportunity for attachment, craving, wanting, longing, and really seeking out pleasurable feeling. And so negligence is a huge thing. When we hang out with the wrong company, what you will notice is that all our senses run amok. You know, we get pulled out into different things. And so there's wisdom in being wise about that and guarding that. And so these were the kinds of 16 that we were looking at in our last session. Now, the Buddha says very strongly that when we know that we have any of these defilements, these mental stains, that we must abandon them. So all 16. So it's very, very clear. He doesn't say, just observe them and they'll go away. The Buddha doesn't say, just tolerate them, it'll be safe. No, he's very, very clear that when we identify that there's an imperfection, that it actually pollutes the mind, then we must abandon it. And the sutta that I've been looking at for an upcoming talk is the Sacitta Sutta. And it says it in an even stronger way. It says, it's as if our clothes or our head were on fire. Now, if our clothes or our head were on fire, what do we do? Do we just allow it to burn? Do we allow ourselves to be harmed? And the answer would be no. So in the same way, we would quickly extinguish it. That's what the Sacitta Sutta, it's Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 10, discourse number 51. The Buddha says you would quickly extinguish it if your head or your clothes were on fire. So in the same way, when the Buddha talks about this in the Vatthupama Sutta, to abandon it, what the Buddha is saying is quickly put it out, quickly remove it, get rid of it. Because once you do, then the wholesome path becomes available to us, that we can develop it further. Because in the absence of any of these defilements, the wholesome path unfolds. And there are different suttas like the Saleka Sutta where, you know, the Saleka Sutta talks about any of these defilements. You would say, others will have covetousness and unequal greed. I will not have it, or I will remove it right now. So it's that kind of practice. It's very immediate. It's very active. It's not something passive. This Dhamma doesn't sit on the shelf. It's something that we actively do. And so the encouragement is always when you see it, particularly in the formal meditation, because it's harder to do outside because we're with people or we're actually doing work. But when we're actually in our formal meditation, we do that cleaning. We admit it and we clean. And so what we said in our previous session was, when we meditate, we contemplate each defilement one at a time. And we ask ourselves, do I have this defilement? And if we find that we do have the defilement, and we take our own examples, and if you have a lot of time, you go through a number of examples, and you ask, well, how did this defilement come to arise? And so, you know, for example, if there's envy, it would have come from derogation, that we've removed people's good qualities. But secretly, what we're saying is, he or she has, I don't. There's a perception of me and mine in there. And when we look at it, we've actually done something wrong there. That person is not necessarily going to be entertaining permanent happiness. And this envy is bad for me. And so when you see the danger, that's how we abandon the defilement. And so we make that strong determination not to do it again. Like this last part is really, sometimes people say, well, I'm not going to be able to do it in real life. And that may be true, but in the formal meditation, it's a very good way of, when you see it, you see the danger and you're willing to abandon it. You say, I disapprove of that envy. There are lies in how I'm having this defilement because of the things that I've misapprehended. Then I'm going to make a strong determination not to do it again. And this strong determination is not to be taken lightly. Just imagine you sit every day and you do Vatthupama Sutta every day. Every day you pull up another blind spot or another example that you haven't seen before. And you make this strong determination each and every time. What you're seeing is, all these blind spots are getting revealed to you. And the strong determination is helping that. And so each and every time when you formally meditate on this, when you go out into the world, it gets a little easier. It's not perfect because we work with people, we deal with people, we have difficult situations in the family, all kinds of different karmic ripening. And so what you will see is that something in us makes us stop sometimes beforehand, or something in us says, I don't want to do that anymore. I'm about to, and I want to prevent myself. And so these are the little wins that we have over time. So when you've been meditating on this sutta for years, you actually see how meritorious it is and how beneficial it is. And this is a sutta that we said before that can be used to actually finish the job. The only things that we really would need to do is to uproot the taints. And so that is something that is very, very significant. Now, Buddha would call this inner bathing. So we spoke about this last time because there was a Brahmin who was listening to the Buddha give this teaching to the bhikkhus. And he had said, oh, people at that time were bathing in one of the famous rivers. And they were saying that this is how you clean, that when you bathe, like say, for example, in the Ganges River, say you went to Varanasi, there are people who are bathing in those rivers who say, it's going to wash away all my sins, all the impurities. And so that's all I need to do. And Buddha had corrected this Brahmin to say, no, that is not the case. This is how we clean. And this is what we need to take on board. This is known as noble cleaning, like Arya Dovanam, like noble washing. And the reason for that is because when we know the difference between what is wholesome, so what is kusala or skillful, versus what is akusala, unskillful, unwholesome, then we're establishing the right view. So you remember we talk about the Noble Eightfold Path as the way out of suffering. We activate the Noble Eightfold Path with the right view. And so when we clean one by one, or even through the links that we're looking at today, what we're doing is we're establishing the right thought. So we go from samma ditti to samma sankappa. So right thought, right intention. So that means at that level, our thoughts become, instead of greedy thoughts or sensual thoughts, so kama vitakka, instead of those ones, they become nekama vitakka. So it's a renunciation type of thought, which is on the non-greed side. And likewise, when we remove all those ones associated with hatred, so like the ill will, anger, all those different things, hostility, etc., then we start walking the avyapada vitakka. So that is the non-ill will thinking. So that's the non-hate path. And then when it comes to all the ones that are included in the delusion, even arrogance, all these different things, all of them basically, what their roots do come from delusion, then we become this avihimsa vitakka, so the non-cruelty or non-harmful thinking instead of the harmful ones. And so that means we're walking the non-delusion path. So you can see the Noble Eightfold Path gets activated. So when the thoughts are corrected, then we have the right speech, we can have the right actions, the right livelihood, and of course, we're making the right effort. And right mindfulness is saying we're not neglecting. We know what the right view is, we're not neglecting, and we come to right concentration. And so that's why it's really good to realize that something as simple in many ways, simple as this kind of practice, is actually something that activates or arouses the Noble Eightfold Path. And so if you're meditating well, the mind will get quite happy. So you see under each of this, like in the sutta, it says, after meditating on these things, you reflect, I'm possessed of unwavering confidence in the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha. And also one reflects that the defilements of the mind have in part been given up, expelled, released, abandoned, and relinquished by me. So after doing all that hard work, when you reflect in this way, under each of them, it says, we gain inspiration in the meaning, we gain inspiration in the Dhamma, gladness connected with the Dhamma, rapture arises, body becomes tranquil, we experience happiness, the mind becomes concentrated. So for each one, this is the fruit of that. And that's really due to activating the Noble Eightfold Path. Like by going through even this recap of our last session, of course we gain inspiration in the meaning and in the Dhamma. We see, oh, this is how it's all constructed. This is, this is an impersonal thing. Even though we're bringing our own examples, it's actually an impersonal thing. And so when we look at it that way, it's very much that the mind gets very happy. It's a really weird thing, but the mind gets very happy. The body really calms down. And so there's mental bliss. And the mind then becomes quite one pointed. And so it's so evident how different it is from the normal mind. Like the normal mind is agitated, it's moving around, it keeps shaking with thoughts and ideas and sick perceptions, and it follows whatever feeling is there. But when you clean with this Vatthupama Sutta, what you find is the mind goes towards being more imperturbable. It's less prone to shake. The body starts to settle down. There's joy at having understood the Buddha's teaching, having got the good results. And in that way, all the troubles, like most of these kilés, these defilements, they come from, our issues with people at work, our family gripes and problems, the way people treat us, the political views, the things that are invading our mind from society. And Vatthupama is an excellent way of cleaning that all out. And so if you have a really good meditation, when you come out of it, it lasts for quite a while. Like if it's a very good meditation, even if it's, not such a good meditation, it still lasts with you for a while and you feel different. You feel different when you speak to different people, when you have to go back into work, when you have to deal with something that's difficult, because we all have difficult things. This is part of jati dukkha. We may have financial problems. May have family members who are sick. We may have court cases. We may have very strong political views and things. But when we pick them up after having done a solid meditation, it's different. Now, I just want to go to this slide. So what we were saying before is it's very good to start from the basis that we have all of these defilements. It's very good because otherwise if we ignore any one of them, and they are linked, then we're doing ourselves a disservice, right? So it's very good to just work from the basis, if we're Suvicha, easy to instruct, work from the basis that all of them could be there at any one time. And then the second one was that this is a teaching that is pointed inwardly. Like Buddha doesn't, in the Vatthupama Sutta, if you read it, it doesn't say, go check if other people have these things. Buddha doesn't say that. Buddha says, check for yourself. I mean, similar to Anumana Sutta. Anumana Sutta, the one about easy to instruct, is very much look at yourself. Really look at yourself. And of course, Nibbana is not going to be outside. Like we don't experience even the taste of Nibbana outside. It's not like you go to the shop and there's Nibbana. You can only experience it from within. So likewise, when it comes to these practices, meditation practices, it's directed inward. So don't point it outside, because it's very easy to do, because once you start understanding Vatthupama Sutta, we see it in other people. But nobody has really given the permission to say, yeah, point that out to me. And at the same time, it can be quite cruel to say, hey, you've got envy, you're so conceited, and it's just not the right thing to do. There's no metta in that. And then it's also not about beating ourselves up. So inherently, some people with certain personalities have this way of taking it like beating ourselves up, like, oh, I'm so bad, and take it really personally. But Buddha, like when you read and really understand, he's like saying this is a symptom that we all have. We all have these defilements and they're conditioned. There's a paticca samuppada to each of these defilements. And so what we're trying to do is simply cut them, like abandon them, cut them, understand what they are, and make them cease. and continue to develop that. So don't take that so personally. Like, remember, all of us have these, and unless we train, we're not going to find a way out. And so it's clearly not about beating ourselves up. And the other one I would say that I've always found very helpful is that it's like hidden treasure, because nobody's really going to tell you anyway. And even if they tell you, they may not tell you in a way that you would receive it well, unless you have a good Dhamma practice and you're a good Kalyanamitta. But most of the time, if we find it ourselves, or even if a Kalyanamitta kindly points it out, think of it like this hidden treasure, because it cuts off the amount of time that we would spend being blind to it, not seeing it, being suffering from it. Most of the time when we have these things, if we really look at it, we suffer immensely. And it's because of this misapprehended view. So we're going to look at these insight pathways. But before we do that, I just wanted to remind ourselves that a lot of these things that we look at, the reason also why we look at it is, say, for example, brahmaviharas. The Buddha talks about the brahmaviharas, these abodes, that heavenly abodes that are available to us. And the Buddha has called these doorways to Nibbana. So there are different doorways. So the doorways can be through the four jhanas, each one also through metta, karuna, mudita, upekkha, so loving kindness, compassion, joy, and also the equanimity. But then there's also ones like through the formless attainments. They're like doorways to Nibbana. So if we don't clean these Vatthupama defilements, then we are blocked. We are blocked from jhanas, because basically there are all these things that are covering it up, hindering, as the Buddha would say, hindering, obstructing, blocking. And likewise also from the brahmaviharas, because like if we take stinginess, for example, stinginess means there are so many exclusions in our mind. We exclude this group and only entertain me and my group. Or and metta is about immeasurable loving kindness to all sentient beings in all realms of existence. So if we are saying me and my family, and we have a stinginess to only my school that I went to and not all those other schools that are out there, or me and my sports team, but not another sports team, or only me and the countries that I like, then there's a block, and it doesn't become loving kindness to all sentient beings. It's only loving kindness to me and the people I like, basically. And so there's a flaw in there. And so that means there's no doorway to Nibbana. So it's important to remember that. Also, with the links that we're going to look at today, we're going to look at insight pathway. So this is the first insight pathway, and then we're going to do a meditation on it. And then the second one is, so the first one is anger, derogation, and that conditions envy. The second one is hostility, that conditions disparaging, and then also stinginess. So those are the main two that we're looking at today. Now, the key thing to remember is that in order to concentrate the mind, we shouldn't have these things, because these things that we're looking at are very closely related to anger or hate. So if we look at the root of hate, so from hate, we get the anger, and anger conditions derogation, conditions envy. Likewise, from hate, we get hostility, which is the second insight pathway we look at, and that conditions disparaging or divisiveness, and then that leads to stinginess. So these mental states are very unwholesome. They block that samadhi, and also it leads on to all these unwholesome things. We would speak in the wrong way. We would have unwholesome speech as a result of these things in the mind, because the mind is the leader. And then the unwholesome actions come. So when you think about it from a chitta samadhi perspective, so the concentration due to the mind, we know this is in terms of the hate path, we are blocked from that. And so that's the compelling reason to actually abandon these things. And that is also in terms of how we want to develop even iddhipadas, so the spiritual powers. And likewise, when it comes to even, we look at bojjhangas, and we look at what would induce or contribute to developing the, say, for example, the enlightenment factor of tranquility. So we call this passaddhi sambojjhanga. These particular mental states are what is blocking us from being able to lift that, because we burn, essentially, we burn from all these defilements. One of the examples that is given, it's like being in the hot sun. And when we're in the hot sun, we're burning. And unless we do something about it, we're going to continue to burn. And so if we burn in that way, there's no joy in our practice. If there's no joy in our practice, we don't come to any tranquility. And so the very evident thing about this meditation is that we do come to some kind of tranquility in our meditation, and that's bodily as well as in terms of our mind. So let's look at this first insight pathway. And what we can see is that we have anger, and we have the derogation, and we have the envy. So just to revisit, even though I did mention it before, anger is this wishing harm on another. So it's escalated from the ill will. In our mind, whatever narrative we have that we're holding anger, we've assigned some sort of permanency to the truth of that situation, or the falsity, in actual fact, of that situation or that person. And the Buddha's triads would be: he or she has harmed me in the past, is harming me now, and will harm me in the future. He or she has harmed my loved ones in the past, they're harming them now, or they'll harm them in the future. And then we also think he or she has harmed the people I don't like. They've done that in the past, they're doing it now, and they'll do it in the future. So anger has that kind of quality. And so that becomes the condition for derogation. So derogation, we said before, is translated as belittling, contempt, or denigration. So those are the kind of English words that we use. But effectively, when we're angry, we do tend to derogate. So anger, when we derogate people, we usually remove their good qualities, we belittle them, we find them lacking. So often it sounds like that person doesn't deserve it, or they don't have something that I have, or they shouldn't be given this particular thing and I should be. And there's a sense of permanency assigned in that assessment, because we're already angry and we're carrying that forward. And in this derogation, what's very strong, which I've also said, is there's a strong sense of me and mine in there. It should be me. It should be mine. So we have a sense of injustice towards ourselves. And even in our mind, we might be calling people names. Like in this little picture here, it says chicken head, rat face, dog breath. I mean, these are all words that remove people's human qualities. And it's not a good thing to do that, because when we investigate, there's a lot of lies in how we hold anger and how we derogate people, because even with permanency, when we say they're always like this, whatever bad quality, and it's not true. It's not true. When we paint that brush, we're not seeing when they're not like that. We miss that. And most of the time, and I'm going to have an example in this insight pathway that will help to see that. And then when it comes to envy, which is conditioned by derogation, is that, we've said this before, it's this very strong resentment, it can be jealousy, but it arises when we're unhappy towards another person's gain or success. So we've said the formula is he or she has, I don't, he or she can, I can't. And internally, there's also this sense of it should be me, it should be mine. And so when we assume that person is having happiness, when we assume that, their gains mean equals happiness, permanent happiness, we're not seeing that actually that person is still suffering, due to aging, sickness, and death, but also whatever they've gained or whatever they're successful about, there's always jati dukkha, there's always some kind of suffering within that. And what runs through this particular insight pathway is, you can see, assigning permanency to whatever our thinking is. So in other words, in a Dhamma sense, we assign permanency to our own volitional formation, so our own internal narrative of how we've constructed the story. So in this insight pathway, the lies escalate, and it's really interesting to meditate on, because you start to feel a little foolish. And nobody's going to know that. But internally, you start to know, like, I'm just being suckered by this way of thinking. And I just need to give up this way of thinking, and the mind gets free. And there's also what you probably have heard just by listening is there's a very strong sense of me and mine. And so I've often said that Vatthupama Sutta is really anicca, anatta, and really looking at dukkha process. Like all these three characteristics come together. If we assign permanency, we take it as me and mine, and we think there is pleasure in whatever other people are doing, we're not getting that Dhamma. But when we have a breakthrough in the meditation, then we start to see actually these things don't last. There's no permanent happiness. These things don't last. There is really suffering in these sorts of things that we're not seeing. And then also, yeah, what is this me and mine that I'm taking up? It's not worth taking up as me and mine. So let's see how this works in a few examples. Like I strongly see that when we take examples, we really have breakthroughs in this Dhamma. So usually I start with, like, say, Devadatta Bhikkhu, because it's good to take something from the time of the Buddha. So at the time, Devadatta, the cousin brother of the Buddha, we know from many discourses he was envious of the Buddha, and he had a very lofty kind of idea that he should take the place of the Buddha as the leader of the Sangha. As the Buddha was getting older, he had this idea, very strong idea, and he took that to the Buddha many times, saying, pick me, pick me. And if we look at what transpired with Devadatta Bhikkhu, he basically was very angry with the Buddha over many lifetimes. We know that when we read the Jataka tale, and I think it's also in the Questions of King Milinda. But when we read those accounts, we see that Buddha was angry for many, many lifetimes. But even in the suttas that we have, Devadatta was very angry with the Buddha for rejecting and rebuking him, like reproving him for wishing to make this request to take over as the leader of the Sangha. And in anger and deception, or with deception, the Devadatta Bhikkhu made the request to impose more rules on the Sangha. So he had some kind of plan. And when the Buddha declined that request, Devadatta Bhikkhu went around derogating and belittling the Buddha to others. So I think at the time there were villages, and he was saying that the Buddha was prone to luxury. He was falsely accusing of abundance because he wouldn't take up these rules. And the rules were just a ploy in order to show the Buddha up. And his motivation was holding to his view that he should lead the Sangha. And so when we look at it, we can see the links between anger. He was very angry with the Buddha. He belittled the Buddha over these rules and probably other things as well. And the way that the Buddha was conducting himself, he was lying, but at the same time he was derogating. And so he was removing the Buddha's good qualities. And basically at the core of that was envy. So you can look at it from envy back to derogation to anger. You can look at it from anger towards derogation to envy. But either way, the result is Devadatta Bhikkhu was in a very, very precarious position. And we know the result for Devadatta Bhikkhu was actually very dire. So knowing that as a very strong example, because we know that Devadatta Bhikkhu is in the hell realms and he will remain there until that karma has been spent or that sort of thing. And we know that because towards the end of his life, although he didn't get to speak to the Buddha, he had changed in his mind certain things. And so he's going to be a Pacceka Buddha after he wears out that karma. So it's a very, very good example because we need to know how dire it can be. And this is one of the most dire examples in the suttas that we can contemplate, to see that because of mental actions, his verbal actions were really bad, and then his physical actions were really bad, because we know he also tried to kill the Buddha. So he ended up with a very, very grave result. And so when we think about it that way, and when we look at this insight pathway, we think, I do not want to be like Devadatta Bhikkhu. I do not want to breed anger, derogation, or envy. And so we ask ourselves, how do I do it? So let's think about some mundane examples. So one of the examples that where we may have blind spots is maybe we're a parent And we're angry with our kids over their behavior. Like they don't clean up, they don't sort things out, they don't get ready on time, they don't listen. And in our mind, after this has been happening for a while, what we say to ourselves is, they never pick up their stuff. They never listen to me. They never help out around the house. So like the never is assigning permanency. Or we might say it the other way around. They're always so lazy. They're always uh, bad talking back, like speaking back. And so when we use the words never, always, there is derogation in that because it's not true. There are times maybe when the kids will do one or two things, or once or twice, maybe because of their own motivation, they might get ready on time. And so we are removing their good qualities, or it may be in our minds sometimes when we're really, really angry, we might say, well, they're a pig, towards our own children. And so we're removing their human qualities. So it's good to pick up on that. And the thing is, often people think like, how am I envious about my kids? Like they wouldn't be envy. But when you really think about it, if you dig really deep, sometimes what the envy is that they still have the freedom to be so neglectful. They don't have as many responsibilities as we might have as a parent. They still get to be quite carefree and careless, and they get to live their life purely concentrated on, certain playtime, even though they have to study, but certain playtime. And maybe there is some envy there that we think, oh, it's so easy for them, right? Because we do everything. And I think it's a very good example for parents to sometimes contemplate because you can see how this actually activates. Now, another example I would use from mundane life is maybe in-laws. And in-laws, I would say, in terms of being angry, sometimes we can get angry about the closeness or the proximity when it comes to their proximity to our husband or our wife or our partner. And it just builds up over time. We misapprehend it and it builds up over time. And we might derogate, and in our mind we might say they interfere all the time. Or we say something like they always poke their nose into our business. Um, and it's for no reason. Whatever the kind of narrative that we're doing. And you can hear the always and things like that. And what we forget is sometimes they're doing these things, they're helping us out. Like in-laws can be helping out with picking up the children or doing certain things. And so when we assign always in the sense of permanency, we're removing good qualities because it may not be always that they're like that. They may be like that at times, but maybe not all the time. And in our mind, we might be calling names. So we might be saying, oh, that mother-in-law is a bitch, or that father-in-law is a monster, certain things, whatever it is. Maybe none of us do that. But if that's the case, then again, we're removing certain good qualities. It's important to see that that's derogation. Simple as that. So don't beat yourself up, but just this is the opportunity to see blind spots. And then the question would be, well, are we envious? And of course the answer would be yes, because when we're envious, what we really envy is that proximity, the attention that maybe they're getting from uh, their from our husband or our wife or our partner. And the thing is that it's really good to own up to it. We are locked into battles with different groups, whether it's in-laws, whether it's children, whether it's work people, and we're locked in because of such an insight pathway. And often I find it's really good to look at the lies we tell it ourselves, that when we see those lies, there's so much freedom in removing these defilements. We own up to our part of it. So I'm not saying that there aren't misdeeds from kids or in-laws or any other people that I'm talking about today, but at the same time, if we assign permanency to all their behavior, there's something wrong in that. There's a lie in that. And if we don't own up and look for the blind spots of where we are envious, then it becomes a problem. And so the encouragement is to really, really look at it. So I thought that was a really good example. Another one could be at work. We get angry with a colleague about how they've treated a work friend, in the past. And, then this particular person, so we're angry because they treated our work friend abominably, but then this person gets given an award. And so we're quite quick to think in our mind and then to say it out to others. They don't deserve that. They shouldn't be singled out. They're usually incompetent and lazy, and they're undeserving of this recognition. And it's like there's a sweeping statement in it that says they don't deserve it at all, and it's not true. So when we look at that, it's very important to consider that there's something of an injustice that we're doing, that there's a lie in that. And so when we think about it that way, then we have to actually pull ourselves back. And what it leads to is really this envy, that we're really, maybe we're envious of this particular colleague that we don't like, who is getting this recognition. And at the same time, when we say they don't deserve it, we're saying that the people that have decided to give them the award or the praise or the recognition, that they're not right in doing that. So we're derogating them as well for their decisions. And really, it could be that we're envious that, why wasn't it me? I did the similar work on the project. Why wasn't I highlighted? And so there are different work scenarios that work like that. And I think it's good to look at it. Now, another example is in terms of Dhamma. Like in Dhamma, we often don't think that this is an area where we get angry, but actually amongst Kalyanamitas, we do get angry quite a lot. And usually, for example, we get angry with Kalyanamitas when we see their poor behavior, right? We may not talk about it, but we see it. And in our mind, we think, oh, why are they being so rude to people who are coming to a Dhamma program? Or why are they so bossy? Or why do they talk in such a loud, rude kind of way? So there's different things. Or why were they so abrupt with people? And then we carry it forward to derogation, because we think, oh, that person is talking roughly all the time, or that person is being so terrible all the time. And in that way, we're removing good qualities, because it's not true. They're not like that all the time. When they're meditating, are they like that? No. So there's a lie in that. And then when it comes to envy, I mean, this is the thing, right? Secretly, and these are our blind spots, we can be envious about how many Dhamma friends really like those people, or how many people follow them, or how many people uh, are close to them or want to be close to them, or listen to them, even though they speak in that way. Like there's so many different things where this is hidden. And when we own up to it, we can also own up to the fact that, these people who are we are envious of, no matter who they are, they're not experiencing permanent happiness. And it's very hard. We all experience jati pidukkha, jarampi dukkha, vyadhi pidukkha, and eventually maranampi dukkha. But it's like, this is the thing. When we're in the mind states of defilements, we essentially get the wrong end of the stick, and it can cause huge problems for us. And so it's really good to abandon. So the key thing is always abandon, abandon, abandon. And you can see this is abandoning it with wisdom. It's not just simply letting it be. It's abandoning it with wisdom. So I'll give one more example. And this example has to do with politics. So in politics, we get very angry. This is the thing that a lot of people bring up. I'm so angry about Donald Trump or whoever the key politician is in your country. I'm so angry. And you're angry with their positions, their decisions, and even the corruption. And so what happens is the derogation happens. They're a complete monster. They're completely corrupt. They have no good points whatsoever. How could they even be elected? How could people be so foolish? And when this happens, it's like we completely remove all their qualities, right? And the thing is, like when we look at this, we don't own up to the fact that we may secretly be envious of their power. We may be secretly envious of their wealth. So when we're envious of their power, it's because we feel so powerless. Like they have power, I don't. And also they have wealth, I don't, or not to the extent that those politicians have. Or we think even if that wealth is obtained through corruption, but it's still that, oh, but they have it, I don't. And even when it comes to influence, to be in power, to be in government, to influence the laws, the police, the other institutions, they have that influence and we don't. I don't. And like even with the derogation, the one thing I forgot to say is like, say in the instance of Donald Trump, even if you're angry with him, his granddaughter would see that he has certain good qualities. There's certain family members would see his good qualities. And when we erase all of them, it's a lie. So we're not meant to be doing that. Yes, we can talk about certain actions that are corrupt, and yes, that is true. But if we remove all, then it's not true. And then secretly we are envious of certain things. So those are the examples I wanted to go through. I think the main thing is that we don't see their suffering, like whether it's the kids, whether it's the in laws, whether it's Donald Trump as a politician or the politician group or the elected officials group or even the work colleagues, things like that. We don't see that. So let's do a meditation now. We need to remember that if we give up envy, like at the end of this insight pathway, if we give up envy, what arises is a lot of compassion. It's a lot of compassion. So if we do a short meditation and take your own example or apply one of the examples we've gone through, and then when we come out of that meditation, we'll do the next insight pathway. All right. Blessings of the Triple Gem. Theruwan saranai. Theruwan saranai, we can come out of the meditation. So, what you probably find from the meditation is that there are actually a lot of examples. There are a lot of contact points of where these defilements are hidden. And one should feel really good when you start to look at it because these are the things that have been knowingly or unknowingly weighing us down, that we are carrying these things towards family members, towards colleagues, towards people in the neighborhood, towards even people in the news and around us that almost like dictate our lives externally. And the blessing is to be able to clean it internally, and then it's not so heavy, and we're not following this wrong path. So one should feel quite light, and there's more clarity in the mind, even from the first meditation. Sometimes the other examples I would use are, particularly for the insight pathway that we just went through, is around even going to school reunions or dealing with a partner and seeing, the types of things that appear in the mind and really looking at this insight pathway to say, is this really true? Why am I doing it? And what happens is over time, it just stops happening because you realize it's almost like the reason why we're not meant to take these things so personally is because, the forces of Mara, they come to pick weak points. And don't even take that personally, that Mara comes, the forces of Mara come like that. It's meant to be that way that the forces want us to stay in samsara. And so the important thing is not to take any of these examples too personally, but to know that those are our weak spots. Those are the spots that need to be exposed and abandoned. And when you see the lies in all of them, it's so much easier. Then, when those forces come again to poke, whether it's the in laws, whether it's the children, whether it's the parents, whether it's the colleagues, whether it's the neighbor, whether it's a particular Dhamma friends or groups, or a politician, or the government, or some third party somewhere that is causing mental problems for us, we go, hey, I know you're just poking this spot that is no longer unknown. Like we know it in our meditation. So when that's the case, it's very empowering. Like it's very empowering to go, I'm not falling for that. No, I'm not falling for that. That's not true. I'm not falling for that. Because some of these times it gets seeded into the mind and it's not even that we've really constructed it. So I find that to be a real blessing of this practice. Like as you expand the examples, it can make life a little more joyful, little less bogged down in things that seem to come to the mind unnecessarily. Like, where did that come from? Unnecessary. And so you know from your meditation. So the second insight pathway is this one also rooted in hate that we begin with hostility. So again, hostility arises because we're repeatedly angry, and it includes things like name calling, grudging, labeling, and essentially there's a very strong permanency in that. So it's been carried forward from ill will to anger to hostility, and so it's deeply embedded now. So by the time we're prone to the name calling and we have this strong grudge, whether we like to admit it or not, but this is the time to actually try and start to admit these things that we're holding on to, again, lies. So it's really important to see what are the kinds of people that I have hostility towards. And this might be a really good time to really look at it because it's such an unwholesome thing. And it can be family members, is the most obvious thing, people that we're intimate with, have more dealings with, particular work colleagues, even ones from the very, very past. Like when I've meditated, I've thought about work colleagues from even my first job that I might still have a story. Usually, hostility comes. We can admit it when we have these stories that we usually tell our family and friends. Oh, when I worked at this place, and it's the one we always bring up. Or this is what happened when I was, in school, and you did this, and we haven't let it go. So it's really good to be able to call those ones out. And then it conditions disparaging where our volitional formations are very set. And they're very different from what another person might think. And so we're lumping it into certain preferences, strong likes, strong dislikes, and it's very much conditioned by the hostility. So when this is the case, we're always measuring, dividing, putting people into particular boxes, like this person, because we think that they're lazy, they go into the lazy box. And so when it comes to disparaging and even like projects and things like that, we would say, well, I'm not picking from the lazy box, I'm going to pick from another one. So we're basically splitting them from the wider group. And then when it comes to stinginess, we've spoken about the 5 kinds of stinginess. We also call this selfishness. And we're very protective of our gains or benefits or reputation. We're not willing to share. We can't give up, particular points of view and things that we have that are surrounded by stinginess. And it's very strongly associated with where we find our pleasure, how we feel about things. And so it's very true that once we've labeled someone here, then we kind of split them off from the wider group for whatever reason, whether it's due to gender, religion, race, whatever, then we're willing to exclude them. Like, not them, only me and mine. And so this one is also quite a difficult one. So what you can see running through this is, again, the assigning of permanency, like our view gets quite set in stone. And then also, it's like not just assigning permanency, but assigning permanency to particular narratives, particular volitional formations. And so we just keep holding on to those things and we won't budge from them. And so we end up in quite a dire position because a lot of it is also me and mine, very strong sense of me and mine there. So let's go through some examples. So we go through some examples. Let's take Devadatta Bhikkhu again, because this provides also a very strong example for us to think, well, this is very grave. So we can clearly see that he had hostility towards the Buddha. He bore that grudge over many lifetimes. So we've seen that in the Jataka stories, that he's had that grudge, no matter what kind of rebirth he had that grudge against the Buddha. And in this lifetime, with the help of others, he caused a schism. So due to that particular grudge, he caused a schism. So that's the ultimate split, if you think about it. Like, disparaging has this way of splitting people, measuring and boxing people. And so when you think that it led to the schism of the Sangha, then you realize that that's the great division. And because of that, like, what he had done was he had persuaded 500 newly ordained bhikkhus from Vesali and others, including nuns, to actually join him in a new kind of Sangha. And this disparaging and divisiveness, it became the condition for stinginess due to the gain, due to the dwelling, due to the families and groups, the reputation, and the Dhamma. So in terms of stinginess due to gain, well, he was quite willing to receive more things, under the guise of his new kind of doctrine. He would so-called keep different rules. And in terms of the Sangha Bheda, it was quite severe. So there you can really see the links, and you can see, like what we've spoken about earlier, that it's a very grave result. Like, this is also a very grave result. I mean, both pathways were active for Devadatta Bhikkhu, and you can see the result and how it led to also those physical actions. So the actual physical Sangha Bheda of the division of the Sangha, but also the fact that it led him to wanting to assassinate the Buddha, harm him, etc., and say all these different bad words. So like we know that Palasa leads to Pisunavacha in terms of the speech. And so he was very divisive in his speech. So when we see that, we clearly think we don't want to be like Devadatta Bhikkhu. He's not the role model for us. Our role models are different ones. So that's very, very clear. Even if you meditate on that and you see what Devadatta Bhikkhu did, then you realize, I don't want to be like that. And that in itself cuts off, because we recognize the hostility, we recognize the disparaging or the palasa, we recognize the macharya, the stinginess. And so at that point, even using that example, we can cut those. And we see so much suffering. Like, what is Devadatta Bhikkhu going through right now? So much suffering. Even in this lifetime, that where he was alive, he was going through so much suffering. Even though he may have received certain gains and all those things from Prince Ajatasattu and etc., etc., but he also went through so much suffering during that lifetime. Now, if we look at our own examples, there are, of course, many instances from at home, at work, in a community, even in Dhamma circles, where we have these unskilled mental states. And I've always thought, even under the guise of good, it's not good to tolerate these unwholesome states. Sometimes because we're doing a Dhamma session or doing a big retreat or we're hosting certain things, we shouldn't allow certain unwholesome states to be tolerated. When we meditate, we make sure let's clean that up. Oftentimes in Dhamma, we fall into that trap that, oh, just because we're doing a good thing, even something that is not Dhamma related but charitable, but you see all these different unwholesome mind states lead to, unwholesome speech and actions. You realize it's not a good thing to do. So let's start with a family example. And like, say, for example, we don't get along with a particular group of relatives. So we know, families are never super duper harmonious all the way through. If you are, it's extremely fortunate. But an example of that in the sutras would be Visakha's family, because of their high amount of meritorious deeds in the past and in the present life. But, for most of us, it's not always the case. We have certain factions in our families. And so when that's the case, sometimes we view different family groups or members, particularly extended family, we label them and we can hold a grudge. So we might even just say something that's not that nefarious. We might say something like those relatives, and everybody knows what you mean. Really, what we're saying, oh, those difficult ones. And what we're saying is we prefer, some of the other family members over these members. And there's already a splitting in our mind. Like we would rather associate with the me and my family that I like and not the me and my family that I term difficult, terrible, or whatever other names that we could call them. The arrogant ones, the naughty ones, and in that label, we assign permanency that they're like that all the time. And when we look at it, they're not like that all the time. There would be other family members who would say, no, they're not like that all the time. You shouldn't say that. They're not always difficult. And in that incident, maybe they were, but in other ones, they're not. Now, how it leads to stinginess is that, or even disparaging, sometimes in our mind, we might think, oh, let me try and get other people on board on my side with that. Let me tell them a story, like their bad points and make permanency to that and how they'll be like that in the future. And in that sense, that's also part of it. That's how you see how it leads to Pisanobhaja, that we slander people and say things that are not quite true, not 100%. And then when it comes to the stinginess, we might say, I don't want to invite them to my house, those difficult ones. Or we might say, if they're coming to that family event, I'm not coming. If you invite them, I'm not coming. So there's certain things that become apparent like that. We make it known that we won't come, or even if we're all there, you kind of avoid them or ignore them or some kind of level of stinginess or argue with them while they're there because the stinginess is what is supporting that. So that's one example. Another example could be like we go to a doctor. Every one of us has taken medical treatment. So it could be a Ayurvedic doctor, or it could be a Western medicine doctor, or traditional Chinese medicine, whatever it is. So something went wrong in the treatment or in the diagnosis. And we can be quite hostile in the sense of holding a grudge. And it could be also medical professionals. And so in our mind, we label them bad, incompetent, uh, always unhelpful to me, or something like that. And then when it escalates to palasa, we've already put them into the bad box, and we start to truly disparage them in our mind. So we think, oh, our family members are encouraging us to go back, or they want to go and see that particular doctor or medical professional, and we're thinking, I must disallow that. I need to do something about that. And there might be a good reason for that, but it's a way in our mind we might frame it. It might be not 100%. There might be errors in what we're saying, like only one instance may be bad or a couple of instances, not the whole lot. And so we need to be a little careful when it comes to those things. And then when it leads to stinginess, is that even if they give another medical opinion or another kind of treatment and it turns out okay, we might just still assign them a bad reputation. We might still exclude their medical opinion. We might not entertain that one time that something happened to us, it was a mistake. Human error. These things do happen, so we wouldn't forgive. So there's something in it that, especially how it weighs on our mind, like the whole thing is not about in practice what is actually happening. There's always rights and wrongs and stuff like that. But in our mind, we hold these very, very strongly. And we assign so much legitimacy to these narratives, to these volitional formations. And in the meditation, what we're really saying is, let's really see whether it's true. Because all we're doing, if we hold on and there's untruths in it and we're holding on to it, all we're doing is we're steeped in unwholesome states and it's bad for us. It's bad for us. Buddha, just remember, Buddha is saying it's bad for us. And so that's the reason why we're taking these examples to really see, am I abiding by holding on to these volitional formations? Am I abiding in unskilled states? And if you look at it and there are lies and there are wrongs in how we're thinking, then the answer is yes. Yes, we are abiding in unwholesome states and it's bad for us. It's not bad for the other people, it's actually bad for us. And so when you see it with wisdom, you say, let me cut this, let me abandon this. This is not good for me. It's unnecessary. All these other people are suffering. Even when they do the good things, even when they do the bad things, they're all subject to aging, sickness, and death. Nobody in this world is having permanent happiness. And so it's really, it's really a flaw in us to actually hold on to certain things like that. Now, another family example could be around, say, a niece or nephew. Say you think that the niece or nephew has harmed your sibling, so harmed your sister, for example. And so you have hostility. Like, say, for example, your brother, your sister has been unwell and some kind of medical illness and they haven't been able to look after themselves. So your niece or nephew has been taking control of the financials and doing certain things on a practical basis. And then for whatever reason, you find out something went wrong and you blame the niece or nephew for everything, like absolutely everything, not even taking into account that your sibling, your sister may have made some poor decisions or may have done something wrong, themselves. But what you do is you say, you're a terrible son to your mother. You're never going to be able to come out of this. What you did is completely wrong. I'm appalled at your decisions. And so there's really strong hostility there. And the hostility is not just in the mind, you would actually say it to the person. And then the disparaging comes in when you say, I will not allow you to see my sister again, like your mother. You're not allowed to come. If you come, you have to make an appointment and people have to be there. And, in some situations, maybe that is true that, in divorces or even in these kinds of situations, it's true. But imagine if there is untruth in the level of hostility. And what we're saying is, oh, you can't come and see your mother, because I've labeled you and 100% I think you're wrong. So what is it? What are we doing? We're splitting a mother and a son. How akusala is that? Like, even if we don't act on it, but in our mind, we're plotting and planning. I don't want these things to happen. I don't want this person to be able to, come. And you might be very justified. See, that's the thing. Even in defilements, one might think, I'm super justified. I have a sense of injustice. I'm super justified. But what if I'm wrong? And how can I feel like I have the power to do that? So when it comes to the disparaging, forbidding contact, making things really difficult, then you get to the stinginess. And so the stinginess is, I'm right, you're wrong. and it's very strongly, all the stinginess is there. Like, you're not willing to share. You're not willing to entertain a different perspective, like even to allow someone to explain, or you're not willing to, uh, you know, basically, even from a reputation perspective, one might be saying, I'm doing the right thing, so you're not going to entertain that maybe I got things wrong. So that's a pretty dire one. Now, in terms of another one, I would say that I came across recently, it's about one's partner, and it's something that's quite severe. So, like, say, for example, there's been cheating. So a person had cheated and they've agreed to stay together because of the family and because they've agreed to go past this, right? So the husband or wife cheated, but yet, despite that agreement, the other partner, we have said, we've forgiven and we're going to move past this, and we're going to stay together for the good of the children, for the good of us. We're willing to work on it. So this is not about condoning cheating or anything like that, but I'm just using an example. And so what happens is we think, okay, we agreed to be everything's cool, but inside it's festering. And inside, we're still holding the grudge. And, there may be certain justifications for that. But at the same time, we're supposed to have been cool with it. We've made amendment. The other party has made amendments. Husband or wife has made amendments, and we've agreed to go forward as a family and as a relationship. So if one is still holding the grudge, then that becomes a huge problem, because in our mind, we're calling the names cheater, 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 cheater. So we haven't moved forward from it. And on top of that, it becomes disparaging when in our mind, we keep looping on the cheating. We're not moving forward. We're looping on the cheating, and it's destroying us. And not only that, it leads to speech where we're telling family and friends about this thing over and over again. And what we don't realize is that we're drawing those people into the akusala, like into disparaging. Because, of course, people who love us would side with us. They would say, yes, yes, you're right. This person's terrible. I agree with you. And it could be years that one is saying this. And meanwhile, the unwholesome state is making the mind worse and worse and worse. So what happens is also with the children, maybe the children sense these things. Maybe we also say things, maybe not about the cheating, but about other stuff that may be also untruths about the husband or the wife. And the children also get pulled into the palasa. So what happens is it ends up in stinginess when we want to start excluding them from things. Like, depending on who we've told, we might say, oh, maybe I won't bring my partner to this because I've told all these people all this stuff that has disparaged them and been quite bad. And then also we highlight their reputation in a poor way. And so you can see the destruction in terms of where the mind is at. Now, some of our examples with the people that we have friendships with or the people that we live with may not be as severe as this. This is like a severe one I'm bringing because I think it's important to see. Sometimes, as I said in our previous example, we feel righteous indignation. We feel justified. This is the blind spot. We feel justified in having the kiles, in having the unwholesome state. And what is true, like if you look at what Buddha says, it's not there to justify an unwholesome state. It's there because it's constructed. So the hostility got constructed because of anger. Anger got constructed because of ill will. Ill will got constructed because of covetousness, that type of thing. And of course, we long for a partner that doesn't cheat, but what we got is something like that. And of course, you need to look at the karmic things. But essentially, what we're saying is, what's the point of continuing with unwholesome states? Who goes down? Does the partner go down because of these unwholesome states? No, the partner would go down because of the cheating, right? If they don't make amends, if they don't change their behavior. But in our mind, if we have these mental states, the partner doesn't go down because of our mental states. We go down because of our unwholesome states. So one needs to really look at this example and to really see, this is what's going to bring me down. And I need to look at it. How can I break this? And so this is like an example that's very clear. Each of us may have different examples that are not close to this, but are similar. And we need to see that it's not happening to the outside party. The outside party is not going to reap the bad results because of our bad actions. They're going to reap the results because of their own bad actions, whether it's through body, speech, and mind. But we, if we indulge and think it's okay for years and years and years to have any kind of hostility, disparaging, and stinginess, it's really bad for us, right? It's really, really bad for us. And so it's very good to look at that. So another example could be like friendship. Like we have a friend who's married to somebody that we don't like. So it's the other side of this. And we side with our friend and we think, oh, this person is a loser, or this person is a cheater, or this person is arrogant. So we've labeled them. And so in our mind, if our friend ever asked us, what do you think we should do? We would think, yeah, we would tell them to split because we don't like them. You know? But Buddha said it's very akusala to do disparaging, to do the pisunavacha. Like Buddha says that anyone who causes the split, who has this sort of slanderous speech, if you have the worst case scenario, you're reborn in a lower destination. But if you're reborn as a human or you experience the result in this lifetime, you'll be split from friends, family, or dear ones. And so splitting has that effect. And if you know that, then you wouldn't do it, whatever you believe. Now, when the friend shares those kind of details, you know, we have this way of getting pulled in. It's actually quite dangerous. And so it's very good to, you know, help where we can, but at the same time be very cautious around advising anything that you give advice so that person makes their decision. Now, the stinginess comes in is that we may want more time with our friend. We may want to get the result that we want. We may have certain views and opinions that we want. And so there's that stinginess there. So again, it's important to look at these things very clearly to actually see the damage it does to ourselves. These mental states, when they take hold, don't forget that this is part of our collective predicament. It's not just, you know, subject to one person, it's all of us. You know, we're all in this same boat. And so if we're weighed down by this hostility, this disparaging, this stinginess, if we come to the end of our life, it's a loss for us if we hold on to these things. It's so dire, the mind is so heavy, it sinks. And in the end, all that happens is we get separated from our dear ones, we get united with what is displeasing. We don't get what we want. So let's do another meditation, take your own examples, even reflect on the examples that we've gone through, and let's see how we go. Okay, blessings of the Triple Gem, Theruwan saranai. Theruwan saranai, we can come out of the meditation. So I hope that was clear in terms of these particular insight pathways. What I find is whenever I meditate on these particular insight pathways, there's always something to find. If I take the example of the last one that we looked at, we spend a lot of time, and I know this for myself, in disparaging. And so when you look at that, when you take in anything from the media, if you look this way or if you look that way, you generally find something. And when we deal with family members, friends, work colleagues, Dhamma communities, all these things, if we're very honest, we live in here, basically. And so when we do meditations like this, in terms of these insight pathways for Vatthupama, it helps to clean it up and it helps us to then be able to develop further. So when we say develop further, it helps us towards the brahmaviharas, so the heavenly abodes. It helps us towards developing iddhipadas as part of further developing, like the factors of awakening. It helps us towards the bhujangas. So when we don't work on these things, what we find is even when we try and do bhujangas or iddhipadas, things like that, or even brahmaviharas, we come out of those meditations quite quickly. Or during those development of those things, we need to actually clean these things anyway. So what I found is that if you have a very strong foundation in something like Vatthupama Sutta, Anumana Sutta, Saleka Sutta, Anangana Sutta, even Metta Sutta to an extent, because we do clean, it makes it easier when developing further on this path. And so I think that's a huge kind of encouragement or motivation that I found in terms of always looking at this. And it really alleviates the pressure in our mind. Some of the time we don't realize, even as Dhamma practitioners, how much pressure there is in the mind that we don't see. And when we alleviate it just by simply removing mental stains over and over again, like they do recur because of karmic ripening, conditions, other things, then it's a real blessing to be able to just simply, no, not going to fall for that, not going to fall for that. I've done this one before, I'm not going to do that. And it's as simple as that. And then in that way, you do it in a way as part of the backdrop, the underlying foundation of the spiritual practice. It can be very, very helpful. At the end of the day, these are all lined up with how we are still compelled by the taints, the sensual desire taint, the wanting to exist because we think we misapprehend the sukha as dukkha, in terms of just having the wrong view, taking things as me and mine all the time. And then also, just always thinking conditions will last and they really, really don't. So a lot of these mental stains are steeped in all of this. So it's a very good practice. So I think that's all that I had to share for today.